Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my series, Survivors on Screen. Today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm delighted to welcome Ali Griffin Vingiano. Ali was a writer and set producer on The Morning Show and also has produced and written lots of amazing things, which we're going to talk about for the next little while. Ali, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Claire.
Um, so I thought that we could start with a short film that of yours that I found when I was doing my research called When I Saw Him Again. So I think you wrote this during your BuzzFeed years. Maybe you could just say a little bit about the idea, how you wrote it, and what was important to you in making that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I wrote When I Saw Him Again when I was working at BuzzFeed Video here in LA, where I am now. And I had written it really, I was making mostly comedy shorts then and sketch videos, and I sort of felt this call to move into more dramatic short films and more long form, short form work. And just expand my as a writer and just I just felt called to drama. And so I had written two shorts before When I Saw Him Again with my friend Brittany Ashley, who is also a very talented writer. And then she left the company and I was sort of like felt like I was like like pushed off a cliff, like, oh, I have to do
Mm,
this last one all on my own. And
yeah.
when I saw him again, it really, this visual came to me, which was this woman following her rapist around, right? A woman seeing a man who'd assaulted her years earlier in public and just spending a day following him. And that was really like the image for me.
Mm,
And when I pitched it to the the person who Stephen Cantor, who helped, who helped film it, produce it, edit it, direct. He was, part of the huge part of the process. He he loved that idea, and he sort of was like, "What if that's the start of the story? What if that's not
mm,
the whole short film?" So, because in my idea, I was like, this woman will follow this man around, and then it'll end when she says, and he'll be with his partner. We'll see him that he's in a nice relationship, and this woman will say, "I just want you to know that he raped me when I was younger." And the idea for that was really that when we have experienced some sort of sexual violence or trauma, really of any form, we carry it with us and
mm,
it follows us and it
yeah.
prevents us from doing so many things. And it interrupts your days when you least expect it. And I felt like this visual of it literally is interrupting her day. She's not going to job interviews. She's not doing the things she has to do. She's just following this thing around and sort of
Mm,
reversing that where she was following him. And then also this idea that like, we know who the bad guys are. This was
mm,
before Me Too. This was pre Me Too.
mm,
And it's like this idea that like, oh, do you have an obligation to other women to tell them what's happened to you and what a man has done to you? And so I liked this idea of her seeing the other woman and choosing to say, here's what happened. And you can decide what you want to do with it. Um, and yeah, it's funny to think about how it was before Me Too.
mm,
So that's really the idea of it, was like, is it is it kind or is it cruel to tell
mm,
somebody that, to tell someone who's loving this man who
mm,
a different side of. So yeah, so I decided then that's the start of the story. And it's probably the first 3 or 4 minutes of the film is what I just described. And then from there, it goes to see after this confrontation, what happens? How does it interrupt this woman's life? She's hiding the truth from her boyfriend. She's trying to get a job. And then how does it impact the woman's life who's now dating this man and having to decide who to trust,
mm,
him or this woman she just met on the street? And then the best scene is really when the women come together, I
mm.
think, and
Yeah.
when they both are able to connect over how they were very, differently impacted by the same man and the same incident. So yeah, When I Saw Him Again came out in 2016.
Wow.
I wrote and directed it and with Stephen, and I wrote it alone and directed it with him. And it was really shocking, the response to it. It got almost 10 million views on YouTube, and this is a 22-minute short film about
Mm,
assault.
yeah.
And the responses I got, the emails and the comments, were really so moving because so many people related to the portrait of trauma. People said,
Mm,
"Oh, I've never seen myself so accurately portrayed on screen. Oh my God, the scene where she's in the elevator, and she starts getting afraid of the men in the elevator." Like, there's so many things that I think people could relate to that they hadn't really seen in a way that was about the survivor, as opposed to a
yeah.
plot device to get something else started,
Hmm.
or through the point of view of the man, or so it was, just the most meaningful part of making it to me was seeing how people responded to it.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that they did. I mean, I found it when I was doing the research for this conversation, and I like paused everything and watched those 22 minutes. But there are so many moments in it that are the small moments. Like the elevator is a really good example. Especially the scenes. There's a couple of scenes with her and her boyfriend in bed, and like this, you have the sense of what's dividing them or what's between them. And all the time you're sympathizing and empathizing with this woman who's just trying to grapple with what she's been through and how to like metabolize it and move on with her life if in whatever way that makes sense for her. I'll link the short, but I also really recommend that people go and look at the feedback on your website. You have like a selection of some
Oh
of those
yeah, I
comments,
do.
which are really lovely. And I think it's so important that, especially for a survivor-centered story, there's often the pushback that like, but nobody wants to watch that. Like that's dark, that's heavy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But there is an audience. There are people who are hungry for that, to have that aspect of their lives on screen and to have those moments of recognition. I think is so powerful.
It is true. Nobody wants to watch survivor stories when
Hmm.
the stories are not told in a way that uplifts survivors.
Mm,
So the reason why you hear that all the time is, "Oh, no one will watch that." Yeah, because I haven't been able to watch a lot of things about survivors because I
mm,
don't want to see some torture porn. I don't want
yeah,
to see some woman suffering. I don't want to see a scene of an assault.
yeah.
Hey, it's very possible to make things about surviving sexual trauma that have no rape scenes in them,
Hmm.
that just focus on what someone's going through. And I think
Yeah.
survivors do really want to watch that. And it's not just survivors. It's one of the most amazing things from when I saw him again was that I got a lot of responses from men,
Mm,
which I did not expect, that were saying like, "Oh, this really helps me understand. This makes me, because in the it was more of a gray area assault
hmm.
film, and I think men really responded to it because it helped them understand that there is this lasting impact of actions. It's not just like it was a bad night, right?
Mm,
It's the way that we carry things over time. And I
mm,
think that, men and families of survivors, and also just lots of people want to watch good cinema. Like, you
hmm,
don't think people want to watch films about really sad things like war, you
mm,
know, abuse. Like, there's just so many things that, are so tragic that we actually do want to watch because it teaches us something new about the world. It shows us a new perspective,
yeah.
or, it's just that you have to understand it's possible to make something really good that isn't punishing for your audience.
Mm.
And I think that is what I'm interested in.
For sure. Yeah. And it's one of the big motivations for me in starting this series that it is important that we reflect on how these conversations are portrayed in TV and film, but it's also important that we spotlight the ones that do it really well. The examples of stories that for me, speaking very personally, have been a tremendous comfort in a difficult moment to lie on the couch for 2 days and watch Unbelievable. Like, there's nothing better for me than to have like a really accurate authentic survivor story and the two superwomen cops who are out to catch the bad guy. Like there's something very primal about being like, you go get that bad guy while I'm here crying. Like there's
Yeah.
a real sense of comfort also. Um,
Unbelievable was a huge hit too. It
yeah,
was very popular.
yeah, and rightly so. It's a fantastic show. Um, okay, shall we move on and talk about the morning show?
Yes, let's
I
do
think
it.
they're nicely linked also because my understanding is that your script for when I saw him again was part of your application for the job at the morning show. No?
Probably. I mean,
Ah, okay.
I think that, yeah, I think that the script or the short were
Okay.
submitted. I don't know.
Yeah.
And because my agent does that, but I imagine he sent maybe both. And then, yeah, and then part of it was, it was that, it was a combination of things, but yes.
Okay. Okay. Can you say a little bit? And I understand you're one writer, it's a writer's room. It was Apple's first big project. There are lots of heavy hitters involved, lots of strong opinions involved. There was a change of showrunner, there was reorientation around one story, and then Me Too happens, and Matt Lauer happens, and a different story. So it's a very complicated, um, backdrop. But I suppose what I'm curious about is how you think about the themes of sexual violence in that first series, and what are the things that are important to you to show, um, in that first series of the morning show.
I mean, I think something that was really important in the first season, and I think for everyone in the room, was showing sort of the complicity of understanding that a man behaves a certain way and allowing the behavior because it's easier and because
Mm,
it's convenient for the network and because it's just how things have always been and boys will be boys. And I think for a long time that is how society, at least in America, operated, and I think in many other places as well, and still does to some capacity. Um, to sometimes great capacity and less depending on the situation and where you are. But I think showing that, even Alex knew about it
hmm.
and, Fred, the network knew about it and people did not take it seriously. And I think that that is a very important theme to me um, because obviously it is not to make women feel guilty, not to be like, hey, we've all allowed this, so
Mm,
we're guilty too, men are off the hook, it's our problem. It's not that for me. It's more just understanding that change has to, the way we're all so deeply impacted by power structures
mm,
and the way that we internalize these messages, because when we see, oh, look, everyone knows about this and they're allowing it to happen, and you're
yeah.
someone like Hannah who's a victim of this man's behavior, then it silences you. It says there's nobody safe to trust because everybody knows and everybody chooses Mitch. So
Mm,
no one will choose me. So there's no one for me to talk to about this. There's nowhere for me to go about this. I just need to keep it inside.
mm,
That's really the result of complicity. So I think that was something we talked about a lot in the room. And then of course for Hannah, like showing it from her perspective, getting to see how she understood it in that flashback to Las Vegas, that was a really important episode for me.
mm.
Um, that was something that, yeah, I really thought was necessary to the show. But it did feel like that was without getting to see what the experience was like for her. And like it
Yeah.
didn't need it's not even about the scene. It's about
Mm,
understanding the pressure that you feel, understanding that a lot of times things are unsaid and somebody's perfectly capable of reading your body language and understanding you're not comfortable, but choosing to ignore it. And so
hmm.
I really appreciated that we got to see the episode where we understood how difficult it was for her, how much she'd been hiding, how much she'd been keeping down. Um, and getting to know her character a little bit better.
Mm, yeah. I that was such a powerful episode. And to me it kind of twins a little bit with the scene between Bradley, Reese Witherspoon's character, and Hannah in the, I can't remember
Yes.
which episode, but the scene where she interviews her, I think it's the final episode actually.
Mhm.
And it's a beautiful scene, like it's almost a monologue, and it's
Yeah.
beautifully delivered, and it's so um like I was reading the actress, Gugu Mabtha Raw, sorry,
Raw.
apologies.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she's amazing.
she's fantastic. And I was reading, she did a bunch of interviews around it, and the way that she described it as a beautifully nuanced meltdown, which I thought was perfect. And it's like the almost as if in that moment, as Hannah tells the story for the first time to a journalist, which is a tricky thing for any survivor to do, is the first time she's really retelling it, that she has been living with it for so long
Exactly.
herself. She doesn't go to therapy. She doesn't have close friends that she confided in. Like it is watching this woman, and it's beautifully portrayed, come to terms with this thing that has lived inside her for years, and verbalizing that, and having it interact with somebody else's questions, and even Bradley saying, you know, this isn't your fault, this is, you know, and she's not able to hear it. It's just too much. It's too much exposure, and it's also just too much. It's too much to grapple with in that moment. um so maybe you could say a little bit about writing that scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that well, Carrie Aaron, our showrunner, wrote that scene,
Yes.
who is amazing. And I think we talked about that scene a lot though, because we did want Reese Witherspoon's character Bradley to feel like she pushed her to the limit.
Mm-hmm.
And when she dies, to sort of have to carry, you know, did I have a part in this?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that's so beautiful with that scene is seeing how she Hannah truly has not processed it.
Yeah.
So, like you said, she hasn't gone to therapy. There's no one she's talked to about this with. And part of that scene is her almost realizing that it was an assault.
Mm.
Because I think when something like that happens to you and you don't feel like you can talk to anybody about it, you feel like, and you don't want to be a victim. So
Mm.
you think, oh, it was fine. I just, I invited him to the hotel room. I made a mistake. And I think part of the journey for Hannah is like coming to the full realization of what happened to her.
Mm-hmm.
And you can really only do that by telling the story and by reliving it and by understanding and accepting that were assaulted by somebody. And I think that the emotional levels that Gugu plays in that scene are just so beautiful. And it's it's honestly real. You cannot talk about something you haven't processed without crying.
Mm.
Without having an intense emotional reaction. In fact, they say that when you fully process something, you'll be able to talk about it without having an emotional reaction.
Mm. Yeah. Can we talk about a different scene, which I know that you wrote?
Yes, let's talk about all the scenes.
Which is
I
the
mean, how
scene
the writers' room works is we break all the stories together in a room. So
mm-hmm.
we go scene by scene and talk about together as a group what's going to be in each scene, what are they going to talk about, what's happening, what is the arc of the scene, how does this play into the overall story, how does the scene lead into the next scene, and then one person goes off with the script, or two people actually on morning show. Often, I think all of season two writers would go, and then they were the people who actually wrote the dialogue and wrote the scenes and put the script together. So happy to talk
Great.
about a scene I wrote, but just wanted to explain that so
Yeah.
people understand that even if I didn't write a scene, I was in the room talking about the scene. Although Carrie did sometimes take a script and say, I'm going to go, after we broke it in the room, and yeah. So
Okay. Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. Because
yeah.
it's a unique format, the way it works in a writer's room. The scene I wanted to talk about was Mitch, played by Steve Carell, and Hannah, yes, outside his apartment. And it's
Yeah.
the moment. So Mitch has gone to Hannah and asked for her to corroborate a story to try and take down Fred, who's the more senior executive. And it's this scene where Steve Carell's character presents his interpretation of what happened, and Hannah in the moment has to grapple with that and try to process how this man who's coming for asking a favor of the woman that he assaulted, how he understands it, and how she can find her own footing in a world where that seems to be the prevailing view.
Mhm.
Do you want to say a little bit about that scene in particular? It's a beautiful piece of writing.
Thank you. Um, Yes, absolutely. It's somebody who is sort of trapping Hannah in the lies our society tells us, where, it's, did you leave, or
Did you
what's the
freeze?
line?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did you
she's like,
freeze or did you try to leave? Which one was
yeah,
it? Yeah.
right, exactly. Thank you. And I think that line, it's so stunning to hear because
Mm,
you're like, wait, but I tried to leave and I also froze but to society, it's like, well, you're lying. Which one did you
mm,
do?
mm,
Why didn't you react? You know, people say, well, you got the story wrong because you said that and now you're saying this. And it's, well, we're in our trauma brain. Our memories are, we don't have our full access to our memories. And we are just trying to find our footing. We're just trying to say, wait, let me explain this to you. I know I'm right, but society makes us feel crazy. And
mm,
so Steve Carell is sort of trapping her. Steve Carell's character is sort of pushing her into this box of, I'm right. Here's all the evidence. Here's 100 years, here's 1,000 years of evidence in history and in culture that show that I'm right.
mm,
Smart women don't go to hotel rooms with their bosses. Um, and that monologue actually was one of my favorite things I wrote for the show, despite how brutal it is, because it felt so real to everything, because I wrote When I Saw Him Again, then Me Too happened, and then
mhm,
then I got staffed on morning show. So it was the sort of trajectory of seeing the change. And one of the things that came out of Me Too was this pushback that even women I know who, were a little older than me, who were maybe in their 50s or 60s and grew up with this idea of just a completely different mindset, saying, well, why would she go to his house in the Hamptons,
mm,
about Matt Lauer? Like, she
mm,
must have known what that was. And so I did appreciate working on a show where we actually got to see how something like that would happen and how the woman would not be culpable for
mm,
this. But from Steve Carell's character, I also liked him getting to sort of embody that voice of, please don't play the victim. Smart women know better. I think that's something that we feel as women all the time, that you can't make a mistake, because if you do, it's like the stakes are so potentially high for it. And the way that society and other people in general can degrade you and dismiss you for those choices. So the smart woman monologue, was something that meant a lot to me, weirdly, to write. I think the scene is also so beautiful because we do get to see Gugu's character, Hannah,
mhm,
standing up for herself for the first time and really accepting that she has a role to, it is her choice and it's in her control how she wants to present this to him, and feeling strong enough to stand up to him, which is, this is a Matt Lauer. This is like not
mm,
only a boss, but a famous man the world loves.
mm,
And being able to stand up to him, and sort of show her struggle to have a voice and to say, that's not what it was for me. It
mm,
was something else for me. Like,
mm,
I need you to acknowledge that. And getting to see her step into her power was also, one of my favorite parts of writing that scene. And then watching them play it. I mean, they play it so beautifully. We shot it here in LA downtown, and getting to be on set with them. I mean, it just, Gugu, like, even though it's acting, it's like getting into that emotional place and then having that monologue screamed at you, and have Steve Carell having to get to that dark place. I mean, it was just a really impressive piece of acting, really.
mm. Yeah, they did a beautiful job with it. I also think the casting was incredible because Steve Carell is, we know him as such a lovable guy, and he's able to play this very sly, very narcissistic, very um what's a good word? Like something very slippery about him. And we know as the audience watching him, like the monstrousness of it, but his own self-conception, I think, is really interesting and hopefully something that will cause people to reflect. Um, the last thing I wanted to talk about was a scene between him and Martin Short's character, which is
Ah,
like
I love that scene.
I love the scene, and it also just makes me go "Ugh," every time I think about it.
Yeah.
But I think it's an effective piece because it elicits that reaction. So just I'll give a little bit of background. This is a scene between um I was going to say Matt Lauer's character. That's not right. Steve Carell's character.
Steve Carell, yeah.
And the character is called Dick Laundrie, played by Martin Short. And it's this interaction between Dick Laundrie's character is kind of a more Harvey Weinstein type. He's a famous film director, has had lots of allegations, lots of very credible allegations against him. And Steve Carell's character is kind of saying, well, you're a predator, but I'm in a different category. Like this is different what I was. And then there's the moment when Martin Short's character is like, so what are you then? If you're not, if you're so clear that you're not like me. Do you want to say a little bit about that, those conversations in the room?
Yeah, absolutely. I do love that scene because it's so real and brutal and horrible.
Yeah.
It was written by Erica Lopez, who's a fantastic writer. She has a Hulu show coming out actually this spring called We Were the Lucky Ones. And I'm excited to watch that. And so that scene we talked about a lot, this idea of sort of the hierarchy
Hmm.
of abuse. And like, well, it is true, that what Louis C.K. did is different than what somebody like Harvey Weinstein, what he did. But so does one person deserve a redemption story and the other person doesn't? Do they both not deserve a redemption story? They're both predators. They're both have, put women in abused women. Um, and so this idea of like being able to justify yourself in this realm of, well, I'm not him, I'm not Harvey Weinstein, so I'm okay. And the way it allows you to not look at your own behavior. And then also the way society will treat you differently. And so I think we just had a lot of conversations about basically we liked the idea of Steve Carell getting to meet one of these people because you have a conversation about Steve Carell's character and you think, who are his friends? Who does he hang out with? Who are the men who are aware of what he does and accept him for it and want to hang out with him and play golf and play tennis? So we sort of conceived of this idea of somebody who was in his circle, but sort of already, you know, the world knew who he was and he was already a little bit deemed a predator, but not in a way that he wouldn't still be invited to a birthday party, right?
Yeah.
This still like not in the way that he wouldn't be nominated for an Oscar.
Mhm.
But of course, we see that all the time. I mean, many men have been nominated for Oscars after the points where abuse has become public. So yes, we like this idea of a man who was sort of known as a predator, but still accepted by the world in some capacity. And Steve Carell having, this genuinely believing that I am not like you. What I did is different than what you have done.
Mm.
And getting these two men together to talk about that and to sort of have this pushing Steve Carell to realize, and only someone who is an abuser could push him to realize
Mm.
what you've done. Why is it different than what I've done? There's nobody else who worked. Alex Levy couldn't convince him of that, right? Like, I mean, eventually she can over the course of 10 episodes, but in one scene, what we need is somebody who has done worse, who has done worse than what Mitch has done. Because there is this idea that, yeah, Mitch is so attached to this idea that he is a nice guy. And that's part
Mm.
of why Steve Carell is so effective in it, because we all love Steve Carell. We don't want to believe that he's an abuser. We don't want to believe he's capable of assault. So, Steve Carell's character is very attached to this idea that I'm actually a good guy, I'm nice. I take care of my staff. People love me. And that's a very crucial part of his identity.
Mm. Yeah, and they're all nice guys. Like they all believe they are nice guys. Their behavior
Yes.
doesn't reflect that, but it's a
No.
very effective way of capturing that self-conception. There's also, I love the line, Mark Duplass's characters has a line that says, the whole Me Too movement is probably an overcorrection for centuries of bad behavior that more enlightened men like you and me had nothing to do with. I can't even say it without laughing. And I read an interview with him where he was like, oh, I don't want to say that, but it really reflects something that a lot of people think. Like they might not say it, but it is part of the self-conception.
Oh yes, this idea that we're being punished for the actions of all men. It has nothing to do with me.
Mm.
Um, Absolutely. I've heard men say things like, "Oh, well, like why would they hire me because I'm a liability because I'm a man. So, I'm never going to get a job again." This idea that like we're all being collectively punished, and it's just I mean, you look at numbers, you look at award shows, you look at who's still making movies, who's still running companies, and it's very clear that men are doing quite all right.
They're really doing quite fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall we talk a little bit about the ending? But
Yes.
particularly Hannah's ending. So, I did a lot of reading before this, and there was some criticism that we didn't get a chance to see her full journey beyond kind of coming to terms with what she's been through and coming to terms with that. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I also know that from a story point of view, if you want to get the kind of stakes that you want, it's very hard to achieve those stakes without somebody exiting in a body bag. So actually, I should give some context. So Hannah dies in the end, and it's unclear if it was an intentional overdose or if it was accidental. So maybe Ali, you could say a little bit about the thinking on those scenes, and your own view on it.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that it was accidental. Well, we don't really know, and there's no definitive answer I can give there. I think that, I mean, this is a hard thing for me to talk about, because it's not, I'm just one writer in a room of
Yes.
writers,
Mm.
and a show is made up of a showrunner who's it's her voice and vision, her staff of writers whose job it is to write to her voice and vision, executives, producers giving notes, and networks saying, this is what we want. And ultimately, the morning show is a soap, right?
Hmm.
It's an elevated soap. And so yes, things like deaths and taking down a network and big dramatic moves are going to happen.
Like, there's part of me that would love a different story, and that would probably be a movie that not very many people would watch. And there is something about having something very high stakes that does capture an audience that might not otherwise tune in to something. And I was also reading, there was one review I read, I think it was again an interview with Gugu Mbatha Raw, and she was saying that Hannah's pain was allowed to smolder undetected, and that isn't a flaw of the show, but a flaw of the world. The fact
Mhm.
that this person can suffer so much, and for so much of that first season, it's internal and private, and you can see, I've watched it a few times, you can see it in her face and in the way she plays it, but it isn't explicit. And that really reflects, certainly speaking for myself, a lot of the suffering that I went through. Like, nobody would have known. I have been in offices, in meetings, people would not have known because there wasn't a way of communicating that or having that conversation. There was no space or opportunity for that, which is not to say that it would have made sense for me to be telling everybody my business, but it is a way that the show reflects the reality in that there isn't she carries that on her own because the society can't.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole first half of the season. And I think that's what we talked about a little bit earlier with the complicity. When everyone's so complicit,
Mm.
you're bound to silence because there's no safe place to talk. HR isn't even safe, right? It's like,
Mm.
well, why'd you go in the hotel room? That's what would happen if you went to HR. I mean, I love episodes 8, 9, and 10. I just love them. I think
Mm.
they're like, I just think, they're so wonderful to see Hannah sort of become this character, right? To step into herself and to get to know her. And that's part of why the death is so sad,
Mm.
because we're like, but we were just getting to know her.
Mm.
And that's the character. She was just starting her life. She was just processing what was happening to her. She was just getting to the point where she could move on, do something else, leave the company, have her own life, have a healthy relationship. And that's part of why it's so tragic, both for us to watch as an audience and for the character herself.
Absolutely. It really makes that her ending is brutal because we have just gotten to know her and see what's coming for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gutting. Um, okay. I don't think I have any more questions. Ali, is there anything else you wanted to add? Anything I haven't asked you and should have?
Nothing I can think of.
Okay. Can I ask what you're working on at the moment?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'll first, since we're doing this on Substack, I'll plug my
Yes,
Substack.
you
I have a
should. It's
Substack
great.
called Little Things, which is a delight. And yeah, just a fun place where I write essays and write about creativity and just the experience of being human. But I also do community activities. So we're doing the Artist Way together. I write about the entertainment industry and TV. And yeah, it's just a lovely space. So maybe you'll check it out. And yeah, right now I'm also in a development process. So I have a TV show that I'm developing with a producer, and as well as a feature film that I wrote a little bit ago, and have a production company attached, and we're casting that right now. So
Fantastic.
yeah, those are
Okay.
two things I'm working on currently that I'm excited about.
Great. And I also want to plug Ali's Substack. I'm doing the Artist Way as part of the community at the moment, and it's really the Artist Way is lovely to do, but to do it with the community is really incredible. So I'm really enjoying that. Thank you, Ali, so much for being with me.
Thank you, Claire. This was such a delight.